So I'm Ieva Cisevičiūtė, working for Research Information Services at the Library of Kaunas University of Technology. It's so good to see you all here at Santaca Valley, Kaunas University of Technology again, for this, let's say, extra FOSTA seminar. We didn't really expect that because we had 4 seminars last year on our program. So this is a nice surprise for us, and I hope for all of you. Those who were part of the program last year, and also the ones who just joined us. On this special occasion, extra seminar, we have 2 invited speakers. Both of them are from Belgium, who managed to make all this way to Kaunas today. So they are Professor Leonard Martens, who's a professor in systems biology at the Department of Biochemistry, the University of Ghent. And also he is a group leader of the computational omics and systems biology at the Department of Medical Protein Research at VIB, which is a life sciences research institute. And also today we have an opportunity to hear from Gwen Franck, who is a regional coordinator for Creative Commons in Europe. And she's also working for open access as an open access coordinator for EIFL, which is electronic information for libraries. And she co-represents EIFL in different projects, including Open Air, FOSTA, Pasteur for open access. So that's a brief introduction. If we organize our work today in the way as described in the program, we will hear the 2 presentations, and then we take questions. If we can have time to take questions in between, let's do it. People who are watching online, feel free to email your questions. We might be able to pick them up. Just email them to me, and that's like a simple way of organizing things. So, Lennart, the floor is yours. Welcome.
So thank you very much for this kind introduction, and for giving me the opportunity to visit Lithuania. It's my first time in Lithuania, and I must say I already enjoyed it very much. It's a great opportunity. And I'm very happy to be able to talk to you about some of the benefits of open science. So my career has very much been based around open science from my PhD days. And I will try and walk you through what that meant for me and what I think are the opportunities for all other people who are interested in open science, and especially also for young researchers, because there will be more opportunities than anybody imagines, and it's really something that you should consider at this stage. So I usually start with a picture, and I like this picture because it's a beautiful picture. It's a nice composition, but also it shows something to biologists that isn't immediately apparent. So I was trained as a biologist in my undergraduate degree, and when a biologist looks at this, the biologist sees an ecosystem, right? So you have the big trees, they produce a lot of biomass, leaves, and they fall down to the forest floor. And then in the forest floor, after a while, there are these fungi, the mushrooms. These are not the edible variety. They eat the dead matter, and they make something new out of this. So in science too, this happens. So people, especially in the biosciences now, but in many other fields as well, are generating an enormous amount of data. And only a small portion of this data is actually used in any published research, because the instruments produce so much, most of it is not used, is not analyzed in any detail. I'll show you that later on. And this is like the leaves that fall from the tree. And it's really vitally important, if we want to get maximal value from all the work we do, and if we want to create opportunity, that there are people like me who are like the fungus, right? That try to grow on the data that other people have dropped. So if you take nothing else home from my talk, here's a summary. Open science creates opportunities. It really allows people to do amazing new things, which also means that we should not push open science as a way to police scientists, to find out whether they are cheating, whether they are doing fraud. This is not what it should do. It should be there so that people can do new things. Now, making these data systems, data ecosystems is not easy. It takes hard work. I will show you what the problems typically are. They tend to be human rather than infrastructure-based, as all problems tend to be in complex systems. But it can be done, and it has been done in many, many places already, and all of these fields have benefited. So the final take-home message will be that when you care about open science, of course we have to work to get it operational. But the big thing we should ask ourselves is, once open science is there, it will not take very long. In some fields it's already there. What can we do with it? We need to make good use of this open data, of this open science. So first, a brief introduction on why we should share our work, the challenges in making things actually operate, and then what can we do with this? I'll talk a bit about my own research there. And then finally, I'll end with a few stories about crazy things like sedimentation, opportunity, and presence or absence of dragons, you will see. So why should we share our work? So a lot of people still think that open science is there as some kind of police, some kind of oversight, where it is a great way to catch people who are cheating on their data interpretation, which unfortunately happens, and in the field that I am in the life sciences, it happens a bit too often, right? There's so much pressure that some people are really pushed over the edge. Now, the problem with that is that open science is not necessary to catch people who do things wrongly. We catch a lot of people now without their data or their papers being open. So it is not a necessary condition, and it also will not make it that much easier, because you still have to analyze all the data in order to find people who cheat. So it's definitely not going to be perfect, and everybody knows that peer review is not perfect either. It's also meant to catch cheaters, but it's not perfect, and neither will open data. So I don't think we should define it as that. We should define that as an important role for open data, because it is not. Now, why? And this is the big question, actually. It's this last point here. Why would we have to define open science in a negative way? It is something that stops something from happening. I think it should be the exact opposite. We should define it as something positive. So let me spend my time on that. We should focus on all the good stuff that comes from open science. So the obvious thing is that open science makes whatever we do available to everyone. And I think everyone is very important. It's not all scientists. It's literally everyone. My mother could access data on the internet. She can read the human genome. She will probably not do it, but she can if she wants to. And there have been many occasions of lay people, non-scientists, that get involved in science because they can access open data. It's not always successful, it's not always brilliant, but at least there is engagement. This is important. Then there is, of course, citizen science, which you probably know of, where people really are actively asked to engage in science. For that too, data needs to be open. Now, as you are also very much aware, I'm sure, is that science always builds on other people's work. This is why we cite so many other papers. We learn from other people. So if we share our papers, if we share our data, if we share our programming code, we will do that so much more efficiently. And that in turn maximizes the usefulness of each search. So if somebody does an analysis on a sample, whatever that may be, the data that is acquired, if it's shared with everyone, can serve more than one purpose. So the net value is much higher. And then my most controversial statement for many people, but I think it's eminently true these days, is that data has a much, much longer lifespan than the paper you write around the data. It is not uncommon for interpretations of data to go obsolete within 2 or 3 years because people find new things out and it turns out that the way you looked at the data was too limited. Typically that's the problem. It happened to Newton, it will happen to most of us. At some point it turns out that our interpretation was too limited. But the data that you acquired, in whatever way you did it, will probably stay relevant. And we can change the interpretation of that data. And then, of course, and I firmly believe that, open science is a great way to foster, to create creativity in people, and it really stimulates to do really interesting new things. Not little steps, but you can make big steps thanks to open science. So I hope to convince you of that later with some examples. So having built an open science system, I can tell you it's not always easy. I'll walk you through some of the obstacles we encountered and how we fixed them. So what is the basic work that is so important is that we have to make sure that everybody cooperates. You cannot force people to do open data decently. If you want this to work, people need to believe in open data. And so that is a winning of hearts that takes a lot of time and effort. The reason why we need people to buy into this is that if we do it for data, we need metadata. We need information about the data in order to make the data useful. If I give you 4 numbers, 27, 39, 48, 36, this means absolutely nothing to you. Or it could mean everything. You need to know where do the numbers come from, what do they mean. And that is a big problem. Second, if you talk about code, right, so programming code instead of data, it should be understandable code, it should be documented, and it should stick around for a long time. I'll talk about that in a second, about the problems we had. Whenever you do some kind of experiment or collect some form of data, you need to describe very carefully how you did it. Because whatever you do has an impact on the acquired data, and if you don't know, then this creates a lot of problems. And then, very importantly, whenever you make interpretations on top of the data, you should always be able to say, I say this because of that. You should always link back to the original data. You say, I think this is green because I used the spectrophotometer and it showed me this wavelength, for instance. And then finally, and this is what Gwen will talk to you about in detail, everything should be licensed in a way that allows people to reuse the data. You will see that I do this for my slides. I actually put the Creative Commons license on every slide so you can reuse my slides for free. We are building right now one in a Horizon 2020 project, and it gives a nice summary of what is necessary. Scientists create data. In this case, it's about cell migration, but it can be anything. But then the important thing is that the data and the associated metadata become standardized, and you need several things for that. You need to make sure that everybody talks about the right information, and at least this information must be present. That is minimal requirements for reporting. The second thing is everybody needs to speak the same language. If you don't do that, then you cannot communicate, right? So it would be extremely difficult for me to give this talk in Lithuanian, and if I were to give this talk in Turkish, it would be very difficult for you to understand what is going on. So controlled vocabularies are similar in a science domain. That is very important. And then finally, of course, to automate things, which is necessary because the data is so big, we cannot do it by hand. The computers need to do it. They need to know what format the data will take. And what does this data look like so that I can read it in a piece of software. And then finally, it's at the bottom, but it's no less important. You need repositories, you need central places that collect and archive the data and then disseminate it again, so that everybody knows where to find it, how to find it, and can easily retrieve it. Now, I was talking about this metadata. So if I give you 4 numbers without context, you know nothing. Why do I make such a fuss about this? This is data from the repository that I built in 2003. And it doesn't really matter what it says. What you should focus on is these 2 blocks. These are things that are not correctly annotated because we have no clue where the data comes from. And what you can see is that as the data grew over time, the number of unannotated data without context, grows. Now, and this is for instrument use, that's on the left, and for tissue of origin on the right. And this sounds very important, right? Which instrument you use to acquire the data is not a trivial piece of information, and the tissue from the body where it comes from is also not trivial. Now, we built a piece of software that makes it very, very easy for people in a graphical user interface with drop-down boxes and everything auto-completes to enter this information at the time when I show the blue line. And it did not help a thing. In fact, we had a drop-down box for instrument. There are 14 instruments listed in the box, and people still select the top instrument most often, and the top instrument is not the one they used. We can tell from the data. It's because people don't want to read 14 entries and select the right one, which is really sad. This is 2 seconds of work, but they don't do it. What did help, however, is this green line. And you can see from my title, what actually happened was the repository employed somebody to look at every incoming submission and filter it. So the person looks at all the metadata, and when something is not present, he rejects the data. He says, I will not take this data set. Now, this only works because the journals and the funders, and especially the journals, mandate, they require that the data is in the repository before they accept the manuscript. So you have a very big stick. When the data does not go into the database, you don't get your paper in the journal. It's that simple. So thanks to these two developments, which are really negative, because we have to be the police, which is really something that you don't want to do. It costs a lot of time and effort. It's very negative, and it's very annoying to have to do that, but that really helped. And you can see that the unknown data declines, goes down really fast after that. Why does it take some time to go down? Because the data remains private during peer review, and after acceptance of the paper, it becomes public. So this slowly dies out over time. And now we don't have the problem anymore. But this is something to keep in mind. You can build the most beautiful system. The human factor remains extremely important. Another thing is very difficult to do is to store data for a long time. These things cost a lot of money. And the people in the US have a beautiful term for this. They call it zombie projects, because they kind of go on forever without a clear endpoint, and they just blunder along. And in NCBI, so the US National Biotechnology Resource Center from the NIH, they had a competitor system to the one that I built, and that was doing quite well. And then suddenly they cut the funding after the financial crisis. So in 2011, it ran out of funding. Now, thank God, the NCBI actually keeps a page, you can still visit it today, where they tell you that it's no longer there, and where they still have the data sets as downloads in a very clunky format, but you can still download them. So what happened then is the people who now run the database I created, they took all of this data and loaded it in their repository. So the data is not lost, you can still query it very effectively, but it was a large amount of effort, it took quite a bit of time, and these kind of things, you have to be prepared for that. It's very difficult to say, I will build a database and fund it for 50 years. That is extremely difficult to predict. And so it's something we have to take into account when we build these systems. One way to do that is to keep them geographically spread out. You have a system in the US, you have a system in Japan, you have one in Australia, you have 2 or 3 in Europe. And that means that if somebody runs out of funding, the other people can pitch in. So these kind of things have shown that, that this works quite well. Also, this happened to us. We made our code available on Google Code. Some of you may have heard of this free website that Google had to make software available. And then Google decided to stop it. They didn't want to continue it. Thank God, again, they made it easy to move to a new site, GitHub. And we moved everything to GitHub. But we had 13 years of software development that we had to move from one side to the next. So that's my 2 software developers were doing this for about a month, spending their time to do that. So you have to be prepared to do these kind of things. And nobody will provide funding for that, right? This is something you have to fund out of your own pocket somehow. So thank God we are still online now on a new website. Okay, so enough of the complaining. What can we do with open science? So why do I do all of these things? Why am I so enthusiastic about this? I did a very selfish and arrogant thing. I published the original application for the database I've been talking about because it's quite funny to read. This was in June 2003 that I wrote this, and so it's more than 13 years ago, and so it's really funny to read it today. But this is where, for me, it all started because I had this idea. There is so much data in my field, which is mass spectrometry-based proteomics, and we don't use it very efficiently. So if everybody would put their data in a central place, and then people like me who like computers could go through this data, we could learn so much more. So this is where it all started. Now you can see the database was quite a good success. This is a unit of information in the database. This is a spectrum, a mass spectrum, and you can see how many million spectra are in the database. Now, the funny joke is this is where I left. So the database is now ran by other people. And you see it really helped that I left. Things got a lot better then. Sometimes you have to be able to leave it behind. But there is an enormous growth in this system. The growth I will show you at the end is projected to become really worse every year, worse, better. But there's another thing you should note. We have a blue line, and this is all the data we have. And then the orange line is the data we understand at this point. And what you see is a huge disconnect. There is a lot of data, and we don't know what it is because nobody has bothered looking for it. You can perfectly well write your paper with the data that is here. That is why you do the experiment. And the rest, remember the dead leaves? These are the dead leaves that fall to the forest floor. Okay? So the first thing we did actually when we started reusing this data is we had to build better computational tools, better algorithms. And for that we had to understand the data really well. So we started by looking at these large amounts, and we're talking hundreds of millions of identified spectra. We started to look at this data and try to understand better how it was generated, how we could interpret it afterwards. So I won't go through all of the details. This is me bragging about the fact that I have many papers. But the bottom line is all of these papers come from the analysis of public data. And it's not bad. It's a really nice thing to do. And all I needed for this was an internet connection, a few computers, and a few clever minds. That's all you need for this. So it's very easy, very cheap to set up. And practically none of this was ever done before. The only thing that was done before when we started doing these things was this, and we did it better than everybody else because of one simple reason. Not because we were smarter, but because we had so much more data to work with. It's a prediction algorithm there. But all that was limiting us was our imagination. And I think that is a universal truth when you have open science, open papers, so open access publication, open data, open code. You can do so many things that you would never be able to do on your own. Even if they gave you 100 million euros, you would not be able to do it. Because the total value of all the data we analyze is well over 100 million euros. So we did all of that work, which is reasonably boring and technical, because we had another goal in mind, and this was the original idea from the start, is to look at this bit. We wanted to look at the data we did not understand. Now, in the biology that I work on, the fact that we don't understand this data means that there is unknown biology. There is something going on in the cells that we don't understand right now. That's new knowledge. That is not little steps increasing the knowledge we already have. That is potentially opening up completely new stuff that we don't know anything about. So that is where we want to be. So in order to do that, and I'll be very brief about this, we had to build a lot of software to analyze this data. Again, this is not easy. The workflow, and you can imagine this workflow works for a lot of fields, is that somebody does an experiment, puts it in a database. Pride happens to be the name of the database. And they did their original work on that, and there's a paper coming out somewhere for these people, and that's all well and good. But because the data is there, we can do a reanalysis, for which we had to build new software, which we gave a fancy name called Respin. But the reanalysis allows us to extract new knowledge from all of this data, which is typically completely orthogonal. It's completely different to what people originally intended. Some people analyze data to find a biomarker, but I can use the same data to analyze something completely different. And that is really the point. You really want to do crazy new things with this data. Now, the tools we built, and this is also interesting for young people, the tools you build can be used by you, but if you build them well, you make a nice graphical user interface so that they're usable by other people, will also benefit a lot of other people, even outside the situations you originally intended for them. So we got a few really nice papers out of these things, and they are used by many people. So we really enrich everybody's capability to work with the data, and there are colleagues of mine who do similar things all over the world, and we really create an ecosystem. We are starting to create all these tools to reprocess the data in our field. So this is one of them. I won't go into the details because it's quite tedious. This is another one, and this is really great. This is open science in action. You see here all these names, so Xtandem, Mirimatch, MS Amanda, MSGF+. These are all so-called search engines, very sophisticated pieces of software that interpret mass spectral data. None of these have been made by us. They're all made by other people, but they're all open. And what we could do is we could build an interface around it, and that is what you see here, that allows all of these tools to be ran very easily, very efficiently, and we redistribute everything. So the bottom line is, if you want to do this kind of analysis, you download a zip file, you unzip it, you double-click what comes out, and you get this with all of these search engines installed. This really was a revolution in the field. And the reason why we could build this is because we specialize in making it easy to use, and other people specialize in making really, really nice algorithms. And together we can do something really amazing. So you see an example here of how we can build on each other's efforts, and we both benefit. Because the people who make the algorithms, their algorithms get used by many more people, giving them many more citations. Before, it was very difficult to use them. And for us, it's really beneficial because we get the power of all these algorithms in our hands, and we too get lots of citations for this tool that is very popular with people. And then finally, because we created a new problem by this, instead of having one interpretation, you see we check many engines, we get multiple interpretations, so we have to somehow put them all together again. So we built another tool for that puts all of the information back together again, and that puts it into context of yet other public information. For instance, here you see a 3D structure of a protein molecule, and we put the mass spectrometry data on the 3D structure to show you which parts of the molecule you have seen. So that's public data, and public data with some processing by us in between, and we connect the two. I think this is a vastly underexploited part of science right now, connecting disparate data sources to come up with completely new information. Now, again, I won't go into the details of how this thing works, but what you can see is that we did our very best to make it user-friendly, because the thing has to work for everyone, not just for us. I think that is something in open code, when you talk about open programming stuff, that's very important. Just one more detail here is when you start up that tool, which is also quite simple, you see this screen first, and then you see this button, Pride Reshake. If you click that button, you can see either public data or private data. So the public data is all the data that everybody can see on the web. Private data is if you're an editor or a reviewer for a journal, and somebody submits a manuscript, their data is not public. But it's there behind the password, and the password will be in the manuscript. It will say you can access our data at this identifier with this username and password. So if you're a reviewer or editor, you can now look at their data by logging in on the private data button. This is really what I talked about earlier. This is the policing function of open data. We support it. It's important that it's available, but it's not something I make a big fuss about. Just wanted to point it out. If you click public data, and everybody can do this, if you have a laptop now and you download the software, you double click that thing, you click this, you are here in 30 seconds and 3 mouse clicks. You see all the publicly available data sets with their metadata. You see all of the individual analyses, and for each analysis you see all of the individual files that are available for reprocessing. And if you see something you like, a sample that interests you, you click this button and it opens up this software, which you can then use to reanalyze the data and visualize it with our software. So that actually means that my mother could do this. I'm not saying she would do a particularly good job, but she would be able to do it, and give her 2 weeks of time to play with this and read our tutorial materials, and she could actually do this in a quite reasonable way. So we make it easy for people to pick this whole thing up. I think that's very important. Okay, we automate this. So we don't do click, 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 click on the user interface. That goes too slowly if you want to process hundreds of millions of data files. We do this automatically in something we call Platypus. My PhD student came up with the name. Long story short, we use the software that I talked about automatically. So we actually looked at some very interesting things. So in my field, there is a lot of data, and some of this data has been made in the context of very big papers. Nature cover papers, 2 of them by Wilhelm and Kim. In 2014, they were trying to get a human proteome, a catalog of all the proteins in the human body. And very big, fancy, high-profile papers. They were in the news everywhere. They were in Nature. But the database that I talked about, Pride, has been around for more than 10 years, and has been collecting a lot of data in very small chunks. Everybody does their little experiment and publishes the data. And so we decided to think, do these guys who make these €1 million or €10 million projects, do they completely overwhelm the public data? Are they doing a better job? Is the big project better than everybody chips in a little bit? So what you see here is really a mathematical trick We take all the data from one of these big, from this study, plus the data from this study. So the two big studies together, we take them both together. That's more than 50 million euros worth of science that you get there. And we subtract all the data that we have in the public domain. And then the circle are all the proteins that we know are in the human genome. And when there's a green bar, these guys, the big studies, have more of it, have much more information. But if there is a red bar, it means the public domain has much more information. And what you can see is that it's very obvious you need both. You need some very big efforts to find things like this particular protein, which is present in only one cell type, very special cell type. It was studied by one guy in one data set, by this guy in one data set, and you see it really benefits. And there's other places where the green dominates, but there's lots of places where the red dominates. So this really is a substitute, or maybe a very nice complement is a better way to put it, to all of these really big projects. A lot of small people together make very, very interesting big data sets, right? And it's a very cliche thing to say, but we prove that it is true. We also went after some very interesting things that are very hotly debated in biology. If you know a bit about molecular biology up to date, then long-known coding RNAs, they are found in a lot of cancers, and we don't really know what they are. They are transcribed from DNA, but they may or may not make protein. And we actually went in a systematic search across all data sets, so data sets or columns here, and all long-known coding RNAs we know are horizontal lines, and we were looking for coding potential. Do they make protein? And you can see some of them do, because we get lots of hits. And some of them might, these guys in green, and many others of them are not better than random junk. This is a model for random junk, and you see that there are no more dots here than you expect by random chance. And so we can really go into these very big questions and investigate them just by using public data. We did something very similar with small open reading frames. So again, the biology is not really at issue here, but you see we find lots of things. I want to highlight only one thing here. You see this old enemy coming back. It is the lack of annotation. When you see white, it means we find a lot of something. And these are small open reading frames. They're new RNAs and proteins that nobody knew before, and we find lots of them, which is really new biology. This is really, you can launch 10, 20, 30, 100 PhD students on each of these things, and there's lots and lots of these things in tissues where we don't know what the tissue is because people were too lazy to tell us what the tissues were when they submitted the data, which is at worst 2 minutes work. So you see how important it is to get this community to take it seriously. And we try to convince people of doing that, but by and large, policing really helps, unfortunately. Okay, I will start concluding now. So what is nice to see is that this is the database growth. What you see is how many new data sets come in every month, and you see this goes up. They are now at 120 data sets per month. That means 4 data sets per day on average. So it's, of course, they don't come in on Saturdays or Sundays typically, so it really is a lot more than 4 a day. And then the size of the circles shows how big the data sets are. And you see, it used to be small circles, but now the circles are getting bigger. So we get more data sets, and each data set is bigger and bigger and bigger. So when they make a plot, and my successor, Juan Antonio Vizcaíno, who is now running the database at EBI, he gave me this plot. They did a fitting of the growth. So this is the current growth. And then they did a fitting of that. And this is in terabytes, the data holdings. And they expect to grow by at least 100 terabytes every year from now on in. So the amount of data is just growing and growing and growing, and the amount of questions you can ask, the amount of crazy new things you can try becomes so much more interesting every day. And my field is no exception. Most of the open initiatives tend to go like this. They tend to go really quick, really fast. So it's really something that we should take into account. There's a lot of opportunity here. We recently summarized this in a review where we said, look, traditionally people do an experiment, they do interpretation, they write a paper about the new knowledge, they disseminate the data, and they start again. They do another experiment. This is how most scientists work. But we say we can now do shortcuts. We can, not for everything, of course, but for a lot of things, we can do shortcuts here where we go from the data and do new knowledge directly. And in fact, I would argue that some of the things we do cannot be done in this way. Because people don't have enough data. The only way you can do some things, like looking for long non-coding RNAs, we show this very nicely, is that you cannot do it like this because you can never be sure. But if you have this for more than 10,000 times, which is what we have, then you have enough data here to do that kind of thing. So really there's a lot of opportunity, a lot of things that we can't do if we don't have open science, that we can do as soon as we have open science. Okay, so let me wrap up by these last whimsical notes. I was once very scary. I was followed by a sociologist, and this sociologist wrote a paper about our paper. It's very scary when that happens because I don't understand sociology, and so I was a bit worried. But they actually made really nice comments, so I want to share these comments with you. They're in bold. They say that the interesting thing about collecting data is that these data collections can be mined for information you could not get in any other way. This is precisely what I told you. A single data set may be too small to ask a very complex question. But you put 1,000 of these small data sets together, and now you can ask the complex question that nobody could ask before. So they figured this out in 2007. It took me longer to figure this out, almost. The second thing, this is just for fun, is that they used very strange words. They said, you reactivate sedimented data. So this means you have data sinking to the bottom of a pond of water, and then you stir it, and then all the muck comes up. I don't know if you've ever been at a water treatment plant, but where the data sediments, it stinks like hell. So it's really not a good place to be, but it was funny. And now here you see the rather socialist interpretation that they give to this, but I think this is an important thing to get across to young scientists today because it is the future. The data that people acquire in their research is collective property. It belongs to all of us, and we should all be able to analyze it. And when I say all, I also mean citizen scientists, not just the professional researchers. Professional researchers are probably very good at creating data, but who says that they have the monopoly on interpreting data? What you need for data interpretation is a good mind. And these do not necessarily come with appointments at universities. And so it's not the byproduct of publication. It's not the stuff you throw away once your paper is published. It's the other way around. The paper you write might be the byproduct of the data set you generated. And it's the data set that will live longer than the paper. So this is a very interesting point. And they made this point in 2013, so it was really nice to read. Okay, so this is for the PhD students. I tend to motivate them like this. So this is how it used to work in science. The crazy scientist does something, then somebody on a computer, which is very important these days, makes it into some results. The PI comes along and makes sure it gets published in Nature. But if enough people do that and put their data in a repository, now you don't need to have an experiment necessarily. You can do experiments on the data, new things. And of course, for the students, I leave the PI out. It might be that you still need the PI to get into Nature, but I leave that in the middle. So in closing, we have to think about open science and imagine opportunities. So the questions we should be asking, especially young people today, is what can you do with open science? I mean, it's coming. You cannot really stop it anymore. People are trying to delay it, and some things are going to be a bit difficult, but it's going to happen. So think about it now. What can you do? What can you study? What can you learn that you cannot do right now? Which opportunities does it create? Imagine if all the data in a particular field were available online. I mean, it's going to happen. In my field, it has already happened. So what do people do with this? Very little, because they need imagination, so we have to train young people. What if all algorithms were available? What if all publications were open access? We're not just going to read all the papers, we have to do more things with that. We have to do original things with that, and the opportunities are really limitless. And I think these opportunities are also the things that make scientific careers. They're not little incremental steps of knowledge. You're going to do something so crazy that you may end up with a Nobel Prize, right? Not everyone, of course, but some people might. So I think there's revolutionary science waiting for us once we have open science, but we need to prepare the minds of people today. So I always like to use this picture, which I really like, from The Hobbit. And I've always wondered, why do dragons collect gold? Right? They don't do anything with it. They just sit on gold. This is how a lot of scientists work. They collect gold and sit on it, right? And then they think that when somebody wants to do something with their data, they're little invisible thieves with hair on their feet. And so we should think of it in a different way. Once we chase the dragons away and we have open science, you have all of this gold. And the fun thing about this digital gold is it does not go away when you use it. It stays there for other people. So it's a limitless treasure. And we have to really worry about what will we do with this treasure. And we need to do amazing things with this. And so very last slide is that I showed you the mushrooms in the beginning. That was not a picture from me. This is a picture from me I took in my backyard. And I've started to try and grow my own little ecosystem, and I would very warmly recommend people to also try and do that as much as possible in their own lives, because it's really very important to do that. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Lennart. So now I guess we have time for 1 or 2 questions. Any questions?
Thank you for your presentation. It was very interesting to listen. But when we communicate with researchers, especially with elder researchers, we very often feel that they are afraid that their data will be stolen if they will open this data. How to persuade researchers that it could be another way?
Yeah, so this is one of the comments I had very often in my career when I was trying to promote open science in my field. And I have a very interesting set of statistics. So the first thing is, most people only publish the data because they will have a paper coming out. So they already cashed in on the data. And then the second thing is, to date, in these 600 million data set spectra that are available today in the repository I created, today, not a single one of the original authors has ever published about the same data set twice. So people are afraid that the data will get stolen. But in practice, and of course this is in my field, very few people actually ever look at their data again. So instead of the data being stolen, it's really like the dragon. They sit on the data and it doesn't do anything for anyone. And why do they sit on it? It doesn't even look comfortable. So I think a big point is this. And then the second thing is, why could data get stolen by other people? It's other people that fund research. We are all, when you are academic, you're fortunate in that the population of your country is willing to donate a large amount of taxpayers' money so that you can do your hobby in real life. When you get results, the first and foremost thing on your mind should be, how can I give back to the public? Which is one of the reasons why we also do not limit commercial enterprises to reuse our software or our data, or in fact my slides, because commercial companies also pay taxes. We are paid by everyone. And so I think it's actually a very important aspect of being a scientist that you give back. And I don't know what the situation is in Lithuania, but at least in Belgium we are under increasing pressure to show that our work somehow makes sense. That the money that we consume as researchers is not wasted. I mean, everybody's feeling crisis and shrinking budgets. So the people in the street, if I can call them that, normal people who work every day so that we can do what we do, they start asking, what are these crazy academics doing with my money? If you can put all your data out there and you can make tools and you can show people that, you know, we try to do all of this and here is what we do and you can do it too, they will say, no, thank you very much. I don't think I want to do that, but at least now I understand my money is being put forward in a good way. And I think together these three arguments, and especially the last two, they should be the things that need to be communicated to all the scientists. Maybe the final thing is that it's very field dependent, but if you see how much data in my field is not analyzed by anyone, that would be such a waste. And that will be more and more the case, that people simply do not even have the time or the skills to analyze their own data completely. So why not give it to other people who could do something with that? Yeah.
Sounds very convincing, doesn't it?
I'm preaching to the choir, perhaps.
Yeah. Any other questions at the moment? No. So thank you again, Lennart, and we will leave questions for the end. And now let me welcome Gwen Franck. Gwen Franck floor is yours.
Okay. I am told I should stay close to the microphone, so I will just remain here. Let me just go back to the beginning and try to get it in a full screen. That might be better. Yes. So this presentation is already on the internet. I've added a lot of links to it, so you can just go there and you can click through, because sometimes I will refer to stuff that I won't have time to actually go into detail. For those of you who are watching online, you can also, I think, tweet questions to me if you, instead of emailing it, maybe it's easier. I'll take a look at it after the presentation. So thank you very much for inviting me and for giving me the opportunity to talk to you. As Jeva has told already, I've been involved with Foster from the beginning, but like from the practical side, from the back end. So I'm very glad to be able to sometimes to have an actual talk about one of my passions, namely Creative Commons and copyright reform. I'm just going to say this as a very big caveat in the beginning. That is, I will talk about legal and juridical matters, but I'm not a lawyer. That means that I don't give juridical advice. And basically, that's at Creative Commons, we don't give juridical advice. So we're a tool. We're not a law firm. We don't go to court for you. We're not going to defend you if you have any questions or if you're sued in court. I'm just saying this as a sort of caveat to keep in the back of your head. So. That I am told that that limits my liability. What I wanted to talk to you about is about how copyright regulation in 2015 is actually not adapted to the reality of the research practice. This should be 2016. I think Professor Martens already made a very compelling case for open science and open data, so I'm not going to go into that. But I think it's obvious from research practice, actually, that what is now the law when it comes to copyright in all different countries, I mean, I'm only talking about the European Union, is actually somehow sometimes an inhibitance for actually conducting proper open science. I'm only talking, for starters, for example, if you work in a scientific project, an international scientific project, what sometimes happens is that you have different, in different countries and different partner countries, there are different jurisdictions, meaning sometimes that you are or are not allowed to do the same things with, for example, a data set, or in some countries you're allowed to teach and to use materials freely for teaching. In other countries, those rules are much stricter. Copyright law can also be an inhibition to allow for text and data mining. I think, again, Professor Martens really showed how important that is in current scientific practices, and not only in STEM, also in social sciences and humanities, for example, in linguistics. Text and data mining is and psychology is text and data mining is a very crucial aspect of scientific research. Another place where copyright can be limiting all the options is when it comes to citizen science. People, like, if your materials are copyright protected and you don't give people the access to actually reuse the materials as they should, I think you can miss a lot of opportunities. I can go on like this. I mean, in education, on social media, when you want to translate stuff, when it comes to open access policies, I think copyright regulation it's not up to date anymore. I mean, basically it's based on the Berne Convention, which is late 19th century. So that was like, it would even be outdated if it were 20 years old before the internet, but imagine how outdated the copyright regulations are that date from the late 19th century. Basically, this is the central idea behind current copyright law, right? So all rights reserved, meaning you are the author of a work. I'm just calling this a work. This can be a picture, this can be a research article, this can be a music piece of software code. You're the author. If somebody else wants to reuse your work, they have to ask your permission. And if they don't do it, you can sue them, or you can you can sue them for copyright infringement. This is the general idea behind current copyright law, very broadly speaking. Like I said, it's not working anymore in 2016. For these reasons, research, it doesn't happen exclusively anymore behind university walls. It's not. Researchers are not like, they're not in their ivory tower anymore and conducting some research and writing a book and publishing a book once every 5 years and not having, like Professor Martens said, not having to explain to the general public what they are doing. These days people expect from you that if you're a researcher, that you're at least your work is online, that you go present it, that you actually go to conferences and talk and take part in panels and work together in international projects. I mean, most of the funding for scientific research is given to projects with multiple partners. So you cannot really, this is not something that you can do in isolation anymore. You have to communicate. And of course, there's also an economy argument. If you don't share your research, whether it's article publications, you increase the risk of duplication. You increase the risk of duplication, or doing the same kind of drug research in Latin and Argentina than you're doing in France, for example. It's not. It doesn't make sense at an economical level, and it's especially not in times like this when there is austerity and when people have to cut costs. So I think there's also a very big economic argument to be made for open science. And then this is also only me talking about academics. There's also like a big part where civil society gets involved. For example, when it comes to medics, not all doctors, not all nurses have access actually to the medical research they might need. Non-governmental organizations, the same thing. Government organizations, journalists and media, teachers and educators, protest movements, and also just you and me wanting to share something online. When I want to click to see an interesting article and I just want to tweet about it. This can all be done in one click, and sometimes copyright law of closed science can actually inhibit you from doing that. I'm just giving here some examples of how science actually breaks the borders from the old university. This is I don't know if you recall this. This happened I think last year. Yeah, in May last year. So you had an article in PLOS, which is one of the biggest open access journals, one of the most highly esteemed open access journals. And I think like literally 2 days later there was a great article on The Guardian about the first murder mystery. Of course, they popularized it, but imagine if you're the scientist writing the original article on PLOS. This is great. Like 2 days later, you're like in one of the most read newspapers in the UK. Imagine if the article would have been behind a paywall. You think the journalist would have bothered to pay like the 40 euros or the 35 euros to access and write the article? Maybe he would have. Maybe he wouldn't. He wouldn't. I don't know. Also, like on a less trivial matter, for example, when it comes to medical sciences, both Ebola and Zika have been, led to calls for more open science because both Ebola and let me show you the Zika one as well. Funders, research funders have actually called to make as much of this research open access, because it's in the traditional closed access system, the delay between the publication of the article and the actual, the way you can work, you can build upon that is actually very bad for public health. Because if you have to wait to fulfill the full traditional publication cycle with submitting your Zika research, for example, and then wait 6 months in the best of cases to get published, and then wait for other people to be able to read your research and to access your data. You're looking at 1 year, and in cases like global medical emergencies like Zika, I do explain it. I do pronounce it Zika, right? Not Zika. Yeah. This is actually harming, I think, the public health, and like in this case, the Wellcome Trust and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and Médecins Sans Frontières. Actually, and Nature and Science as well, they actually called for make all Zika research as open as possible, as soon as possible, to help fight this epidemic. So I love to have put this quote in here from Isaac Newton's, because he said, like, this is this how you progress in society, by building upon other people's work. And then I have to say, unfortunately, the reality often looks more like this. I don't have university IP address anymore, which means that nobody is paying for my access to scientific journals, which means that I get this when I want to try to access an article. Like here, I have a quick price of more than $1,000, and it was only to reuse an image from a Nature article, not even an article itself. I wanted to put it on a website. I grant you that, but it was a non-commercial website. So this is what happens, and I don't have any like bad intentions with it. I'm not going to publish it myself. I just want to read what's in it and use the materials that are available. So this is what happens. No access. And I think it's understandable. I just added this slide this morning because I was reading this. I saw this on Twitter in the Washington Post. I don't know if you're following this whole Sci-Hub controversy. Have you heard of it? Yeah, it's a sort of, I mean, they call it like Napster for science, right? It's basically it's Alexandra Albakian from Kazakhstan who actually made a gigantic database of scientific articles, which she crawls and harvests from everywhere, and I think it's a big legal controversy as well, because what she's doing is technically illegal, or at least she's being sued for it right now in the US. I don't know the details. She claims that, I mean, if you put one of these articles in a database and you allow others to read it, what she does also is like she goes to if you cannot access it, she goes to try to find the passwords from libraries, and then so it's a bit fishy, I think. But what the idea is in general is that she really wants as much access as possible, as much reach as possible, to be open for everybody. And she says, like, it's not fair that these publishers actually keep this behind a paywall. And she now has almost 50 million ones. And I think this is a kind of, whether you agree with it or not, whether there's, I don't know, if you're a librarian, I do imagine you get sometimes questions about that. People saying, like, I don't bother anymore with you guys. I just find it on Sci-Hub, or I can tweet with I can has PDF or whatever. There are several ways, not always legal. And I'm not going to say anything like whether I approve of this or not. But I do think it's a sign of the times that if something like this happens, and you're talking about 50 million articles. This is like a huge movement. This is a huge user database, I think if this happens, that means that something is wrong with your traditional system. And I'm just going to leave that there. What I wanted to say is, like, in an ideal world, if you're on like how it should look like, I think a couple of things that you should keep in mind is that copyright should not be in part of the classroom. If I'm giving this presentation, and I want to use a picture of Mickey Mouse, but I know it's filmed, I shouldn't have to worry about whether or not Disney will sue me. I think that's very normal, but it's often copyright law often intrudes in the classroom, even if you're just doing stuff for educational purposes. The same thing is about like technical protection measures. This is a very good example of how copyright can really prevent dissemination of information. I don't know if you know what I mean by this. This is just to give it in a non-scientific example. I pay for Netflix in Belgium, and I cannot access the American Netflix. This is the very common, in lay terms, what is meant by technical protection measures. So Netflix actually puts in little things, technical things in the background, so that you cannot. They detect your IP address, and they make sure that you cannot access the American version. I think in an ideal world, also copyright law would be harmonized, so there would not be different copyright laws in Lithuania than there would be in Belgium. We would also not have new copyrights introduced, such as, for example, right now there's talk about some publishers wanting to add to introduce copyrights through snippets and short fragments. When you're, for example, like a 5-word string or something, that could also be copyrighted, which would make it very difficult for services like Google, for example, to do their work properly. Because what if you cannot preview it anymore? This becomes problematic. Freedom of panorama. This is another pet peeve of mine. This is and something that really differs very, very widely in European countries. Like, for example, in Belgium, you cannot take a picture of the atomium and put it online because it's copyright protected. In Greece, I don't know if it's still the case, but it used to be the case that you cannot take a picture of the Acropolis, which is a building of 2,500 years old. So I really would like to know who actually has the copyrights to that building. Nobody. But that's and in other countries, such as in UK, you're allowed to photograph and distribute anything you want. Makes it sometimes very complicated. Also, what I want to add here is that what's in the public domain should remain in public domain. So if you're in the business of digitizing things, if you're in the business of digitizing public domain works, don't put copyrights on it. I mean, you're not allowed to, but often with the best intentions it happens because people are very proud of their digitization work and they put it online and they say like, okay, now we're going to put this under a Creative Commons license, which technically you're not allowed to because you're not the original copyright holder. I put in some links in there, so if you're more interested in more of this, you can just click through in the final presentation. And then the right to read is the right to mine. This is an important one that I wanted to add here because we're talking about open science, is that open science is about more than just having access to the PDF on a website. Make sure that, that the formats and make it reusable as well instead of only readable. If you want to know more about this as well, you can also go to the Comunia website. This is like a global, like a European organization working around copyright reform. This all is just my utopian view of how an ideal copyright system would look like, of which open science, of course, would play a big role. While we're waiting for that, I want to introduce you to you probably have heard of it, but I want to talk a bit more about how Creative Commons licenses work. Because basically what Creative Commons licenses are, they're like they're actually, we call them a fix for a broken copyright system. So everything I talked about before that can inhibit open science, it can inhibit like free flow of information. You cannot fix all of it with Creative Commons licenses, but you can fix some of it. Because what Creative Commons does is actually it allows creators. So that's basically whether you're a writer or a musician or a graphic designer or a software designer, or a teacher or a photographer or whatever, you can determine beforehand what you want to be done with your work. And you could at the same time provide clarity and legal certainty for your users. And this is all just happening by just adding one click. So by just clicking once and adding one image to your work. I'm just leaving this here. This is the same actually. I think the most important thing about Creative Commons is that it leaves the user in no doubt about the intention of the author. So it actually allows you to ignore all those nifty copyright rules and the fact that it can be different in Lithuania than it is in Belgium and than it is in UK and than it is in Spain. If there's a Creative Commons license on the work, you know worldwide what you can and cannot do with it. So I'm putting this here just because of the links. So I'm not going to read it all. You can just click through. I think the only thing that's really important there is that Creative Commons change your copyright terms from all rights reserved, which is a traditional copyright tagline, to some rights reserved. And maybe it's also important to notice that when you have fair copyright laws, Creative Commons would actually not be needed anymore. We might be needed for for advocacy issues, but the license in itself would not be needed. If you're wondering like where you can find Creative Commons licensed work, these are some examples. You might think you've never used them or you never encountered them. If you ever cited from a Wikipedia article and said, this is from Wikipedia, you actually concurred with the terms of a Creative Commons license, because every article on Wikipedia is licensed under a Creative Commons license. So I'm very happy to say that by the end of 2015 we had over 1 billion CC licensed work in the commons. That's a lot of stuff. I can just refer back here. So the biggest part is of course images and photos, for example, because Flickr is part of it and Wikimedia Commons. But we also have plenty of texts and some music and some open educational resources. And almost 1.5 million research journal articles, mainly because some big publishers also give the opportunity to use Creative Commons licenses. I'm going. How much time do I still have, Eva? Plenty. Okay, just shout if. So I'm going to, because I think sometimes people know what Creative Commons is about but don't know the technical details. I'm going to go over this pretty quickly. Also, I've inserted links there, so if you want to know more, you can just click through. But this is the basis. Creative Commons exists out of 4 building blocks, and these 4 building blocks can be combined into 6 licenses. They are developed by the way, by volunteers. So we have some lawyers at Creative Commons headquarters, but all the rest of them, the development, the translation, the porting to your local jurisdictions if necessary, it all happens by these people. I'm putting them there because it's a lot of work they put in there, and they do it voluntarily because Creative Commons is a not-for-profit. So, the different elements of the licenses. This is the most important one because this is the default in all 6 of them. So this is the buy condition. This means that you are free to share, adapt, and reuse, even commercially, the material, but you have to give appropriate attribution. This is actually the default of every license. So whichever of the 6 ones you use, you always have to do this. You always have to attribute. One of the additional potential licenses is the share alike condition, which means that if you do the remix, you have to reshare the materials under the same conditions as the original one. Non-commercial is actually, it's a popular clause. This means that you cannot use the material for commercial purposes. I want to make a little side note here that this sounds very attractive because like this, the big bad commercial companies cannot reuse your work. However, don't forget that things like blogs that run advertisements or journals also are considered commercial enterprises. So before you very enthusiastically go license your work because you don't want Shell to reuse it, also keep in mind that maybe a private blogger who supports her work through a blog which runs ads can also be considered commercial. So I'm just putting this here because sometimes I think people are going to use this license too quickly and forget that it can inhibit some forms of reuse. And then there's like a very strict clause, a 4th one, which is a no derivatives one, which means you cannot remix, transform, or build upon. This is the lingo that's used in Creative Commons. You should just think about you cannot change the material, you cannot take fragments out of it, you cannot translate it, you cannot add layers to it if it's an image. You cannot put like extra letters on it or change the image in any way, or like a filter, for example. You cannot put it on there. At least not if you plan to distribute it. Of course, what you're doing on your home computer is your own choice. I think this is a very strict license. So this means that basically you can only use the work. For example, if this presentation, if I would have licensed it with this would mean that you could not pick one quote out of it to reuse it, unless you ask my permission, of course. But that's not the intention of a Creative Commons license. So you can get 6 licenses. Again, I've added a link, so if you want to read all the details, you can check it. So these are the 6 combinations that are possible. As you see, so the upper ones are actually the quite liberal ones. This means you have to give attribution or share under the same circumstances. Then the second ones are either you have to give attribution and keep it in one in one part, or you cannot reuse it for commercial purposes. And then you have two very strict ones, which is you cannot use it for commercial purposes, and you cannot use it, you have to reshare it under the same terms. And then you have the strictest one is non-commercial, no derivative, so you cannot do basically anything with it except look at it and distribute it if it's not for commercial reasons. I know this is very confusing. I mean, this is like, in theory, this is all very very daunting. There are luckily lots of nice tools on the internet that allow you to choose. We at Creative Commons, we have our own chooser, but I will show it to you later. But you also have this kind of works, which basically ask you the questions, like, do you want it to be shared? Do you allow commercial use? Can it be adapted? And then in the end, you arrive at the license you should be using for your work. I'm adding this here. Don't forget that CC licensors they only work when the material can be copyrighted. Just as, I mean, seriously, this sounds very, very easy, but you would be surprised like how much public domain works are, for example, actually get a CC license with the best of intentions. People think like we want to add a CC license because we want to provide the clarity, but actually you cannot add a CC license if you're not the author or if you don't hold the author rights. I see it a lot, and I see it also with very big institutional, cultural institutions. So it's not something that only ignorant individuals do. It's a common misconception about Creative Commons. And also, of course, it's only you only have to apply a Creative Commons license if the use would otherwise not be allowed by copyright rules. For example, you are allowed to cite. In most cases, you are allowed to give a short fragment and to give citation. So you don't need, if you want your work to be cited, you don't necessarily have to apply a Creative Commons license. This is the right to cite is usually a part of normal copyright law. Okay. Apart from those 6, we also have 2 additional legal tools, who are technically not licenses, but they can be especially useful if you're a cultural institution, if you have lots of materials that fall into the public domain. I think the public domain here in Lithuania is also 70 years after the death of the author. That's usually the term, right? So everything that's older than 70 years after the death of the author, you can do with it whatever you want. You don't have to credit them. This means you can do with Shakespeare or with Jane Austen whatever you want, and you don't have to pay authors' rights to their heirs, to put it very simply. If you have many materials that are in the public domain, you might want to consider to actually make this very clear by adding the public domain mark, which has the same advantage as the other CC licenses, which is that somebody who does not know much about it can just like click on this and just come into a human readable version of oh, this is the public domain, so I don't have to cite you, I don't have to cite the source or something, I can just use it. And if for works that you want to put yourself in the public domain, so if you are the author, for example, also this is used a lot when it comes to metadata. When you say like, okay, I just want to make it very clear that everybody can access this metadata, that they can do with it, they can crawl it, they can mine it, they can do that. Europeana can use our metadata. It's always very useful to add a CC0 mark to it, and that means that you actively put something into the public domain. Again, with the big benefit that there's no doubt anymore. So if somebody thinks like, should I, does this fall under copyright or not? If you see this, you see it's public domain. This is one more thing that I want to mention about the licenses. That there are levels of openness. I did show it shortly when it showed the 6 licenses. Only the upper 3 actually are considered to be, I would say, open culture or free culture licenses. So these are being used by Wikimedia. If you want your stuff to be picked up by them, if you should consider using one of the upper 3 because they won't accept the lower 4. And then I show the degradation of the licenses becoming more strict. Like, for example, the no derivatives one not allowing for translations, and no commercial one not allowing commercial use of your work, for example, in newspapers. This is already like on a further level, but this is something. The reason why I'm saying this is that don't automatically, if you want to license your work, don't automatically grab to the most restrictive license because you think it will give you the most protection. It can also possible limit some kinds of use that might be you might want actually, or like as Lennart said, that you might not know already, not know yet why it can be used. Maybe in 5 or 10 years somebody will do something very innovative with your picture, and if you put it in a license, maybe you will that way inhibit somebody from doing that. And this is just like the distribution of the license. As you see, we have over 50% are actually using one of the very, very liberal, very free cultural licenses. I'm taking these graphs, by the way, from the State of the Commons. You can follow the link. It's like a nice overview of what we do and what we're working on. I do have a video clip here, but maybe I should continue with the presentation or not. Can I show it? It's basically what I've said, but like in a much fancier way. If I can.
Have you ever wondered how to download and share digital content legally? How do you let people know that you want them to reuse your own work? Creative Commons licenses can help you do both. We'll show you how. Our world's exploded with digital opportunities. Now we can communicate, share, and work together using the exceptional distribution network that is the internet. Information and content can fly between us in exciting new ways. But it's important to know that when something is created, say a photo, a document, or a music track, it's automatically protected by copyright. Copyright enables people to say who can share and reuse their creations. You must always obtain someone's permission before sharing or reusing their work, even when it's posted online. But what if a creator wants everyone to use their work, without the hassle of granting permission over and over? This is where Creative Commons can help. Creative Commons provides licensing tools that are free to use. You can apply a license to your work, which refines your copyright and streamlines how you give permission. Zach here downloads a photo called CC Kiwi that he wants to use in his science project. He can do this without asking Kiri, the photographer, first, because she's already given permission with a Creative Commons license. Kiri's license is legally robust, but easy for Zach to understand. She's told the world, including Zach, that they can use CC Kiwi as long as they acknowledge her as the original photographer. There are more rules Kiri could have included. Creative Commons licenses are made up of license elements. You can think of them as rules, and each have their own special symbol. This is attribution. It means that Zach must acknowledge Kiri when he publishes his science project containing her photo. This is non-commercial. It means no one else but Kiri is permitted to make money from CC Kiwi. Tim wants to print the photo onto t-shirts and distribute them to friends. He can do this, but he must not sell them. This is no derivatives, and it means that Kiri hasn't given permission to change her photo. Kate can use CC Kiwi on her design blog, but will need to ask Kiri before retouching or mixing up the image. And this is share alike. It means new creations that use CC Kiwi need to carry the same license. Jack incorporates his own remix of CC Kiwi in his video installation, but he must share the work under the same terms that Kiri has. Each Creative Commons license gives permission to share and includes the attribution rule. So people who find your Creative Commons licensed work are automatically allowed to share it, but are required to acknowledge you if they do. The other 3 license elements are optional, and you can choose which ones to add, if any. Here are the 6 combinations that make up Creative Commons licenses. The difference between them is how many rules apply when someone wishes to use your work. The attribution license allows reusers the most freedom, and the Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives license allows the least freedom. The Attribution license and the Attribution Share Alike licenses are sometimes referred to as Free Cultural Works Approved licenses. These three licenses restrict commercial use of a work. And these two licenses do not give permission for adapting or remixing. These two licenses require new works to be licensed under the same terms. To choose and apply one of these licenses, and to view their terms in more detail, visit us at creativecommons.org.nz. Or you can answer some questions to help you decide which license best suits your needs at creativecommons.org/choose. There are some good ways to find other people's Creative Commons licensed work online. You can use a search filter by going to the Creative Commons website. Or why not try the Jamendo website for music, Flickr for images, or Digital NZ for New Zealand content. Using Creative Commons licenses could help your creations reach more people. Maybe you want to connect with others across the globe and take turns at improving a report. Or maybe you just want to have fun, remixing someone else's work. Whatever reason you have to share your work, you'll find there are scientists, educators, companies, and public agencies who are using Creative Commons. By opening up permission, just imagine how much we can achieve. Collaborating on what we hold in common, being open about big decisions, and finding solutions in the spaces between us. Let's work together, confidently and legally.
Okay, obviously this video is from New Zealand, but that doesn't make it less applicable for here in Europe. So I think this sort of like explains in a more visual way what I was saying in the slides. If you have any questions about that, we have some local teams that can help you in your own language. There is supposed to be CC Lithuania, but I'm not sure if they're still very active. But don't hesitate to just contact me or anybody else at Creative Commons with your questions, and they're always available for advice and comments. So on a technical level, I'm going to go over this very quickly. How does it work? It's basically a Creative Commons license consists of 3 layers. One is the Commons deed, which is you can refer to as like the non-lawyer readable version of the work. This is what you get, what you arrive at if you click on the conditions of a Creative Commons license. Under that you have the legal code, which is a very long text, which is worked on by lawyers, is translated by lawyers. It's very, if you go to court with this text, your case will hold. And then of course there's also a digital layer, allowing for digital recognition of the licenses, allowing on Flickr or on Google to search for the appropriate license. So of course this has to be somewhere in the background. We call them machine readable, human readable, and legal code. This is the legal code. This is an example. I don't think it's already. We try to translate as much as possible into local languages as well. I don't think the Lithuanian translation is already there. I hope we manage. If any of you feels the need, so the urge to participate, please get in touch. We can use some new blood. Some new blood, I think. So we are now at version 4.0. So once every couple of years, we try to we make a new version of this, adapted to the new reality, adapted to comments that were made on previous versions. And actually, they are created by the legal team, but they're most importantly they're based on the input of the CC teams worldwide. So what happens is I'm talking about a consultation period of 2 years before we actually put the license into work. So it's getting talked about, discussed on a mailing list, on live meetings. What is new about this version 4.0 is actually that it's universal. It's universally applicable. The previous versions were actually, we call them porting. They were actually adapted to local jurisdictions. The Creative Commons 4.0 license is international, meaning that it's applicable worldwide. Yeah, so I mean, this might be a legal concern that does not interest you that much, but it's like it basically means that your license text, this text is valid both in Belgium as it is in Lithuania as it is in the US, instead of it used to be adapted to the local jurisdictions. And this is the one that if you click on a Creative Commons license, what you get. This is, this is very understandable. This is also available in the local languages, in more languages actually than the long version, because this is what most teams translate immediately. So as you see, they say what you can do with it and what the terms are, and they also give a bit of extra information or notices. And then this is the machine-readable layer, which I don't understand actually. I'm sorry, but but I'm showing it in any case. Well, yeah, I can explain why you use it. If you, for example, if you go to Flickr, by now you have if you want to find a picture that you can use freely, reuse freely, you can filter on Creative Commons licenses. So this is in the background, and this is a chooser they mentioned in a video. I'm going over this quickly because we are currently redesigning the website. So this might look entirely different next year. But it makes it, if you're a bit overwhelmed by the different options and the different choices you have, you can very easily just go to Creative Commons chooser and then just say what you want and what not want to happen with the stuff. And then you get the right license. You get it in all sorts of, you even get a HTML code. You get the logo in different formats, and you can just copy paste. These are some things that I want to mention, and I'm not going to go into detail. They're linkable, so you can click and have more information. This is once you put a license on something, you cannot recall it. So you cannot change your mind a week later and say, I'm not going to do it. The original version with the license still stands. So make sure your material is appropriate. I mentioned that before. You can only do this for stuff that that is copyrightable. Think about how you want it to be used, so don't use too strict a license or too loose a license. Make sure that you realize what the conditions of the license you use are. Creative Commons is quite a flexible system. For example, you can always give some extra information. For example, if you use a no derivatives, so that people the ND license, you can always state in the text that, but you can't translate, for example. So it's Creative Commons license allow for some modifications of the original license if you would want to. And make it easy for others if they want to cite you. Make it easy for others. Like make sure that if you put your work somewhere that it's clear that you're the author if you want to be acknowledged. And then I want to I want to close by this because I think this is important. If you use CC license material or if you create CC license material, make sure to keep this in mind. So remember that attribution is obligatory, so that you have to cite the name and the name of the author and preferably also the name of the work if you have it. This license, you can use it offline, but it's meant to be used on the internet. So please, it's very easy to just include the link to the original source. Then even if you mess up the attribution, if you forget, if you don't find the name, or if you don't find the name of the work or the name of the author, at least include the link to the original version, so that other people can retrace your steps and maybe add some more information. If you use a work and under a specific license, it's also good practice to actually mention the license under which it's available. Again, for not making it easier for other people to reuse your version. If they know, okay, this is available on this license, and they can just click. This goes for all kind of copyright statuses. Actually, not only CC licenses. If you use something, you should accredit the source and mention whether it's somebody else holds the copyright. You obviously don't need to do this when we're talking about public domain works. And here again, if you make a variation or a remix or an adaptation, link back to the original work. I'm giving an example here of how it could be. So mention the title, mention the author, mention the source. I included a link there. and mention the license. This is not the only way you can cite a Creative Commons license work, but it's one of the most common ways. This is not how to do it. So picture found on Flickr. Yeah, I mean, nobody knows where. I mean, go try to find this picture on Flickr if that's the information. I put this here, and these are actual real examples, not only for these pictures, but you do see this sometimes in for example, in newspapers. Picture found on Flickr. In a photograph, one big Belgian newspaper is very good at messing this up. Copyright Creative Commons. Creative Commons is not a copyright holder. Creative Commons is the tool by which a copyright holder can assess the rights. Here's the title and the author. So I mean that's 2 out of 3 rights, but it doesn't say you don't say where you found it. You found it on Flickr, and you also don't say that it's actually available under Creative Commons license. So somebody who might want to reuse this might not be able to. I mean, he should step back, go back to Flickr, see what the reuse rights are. While you might as well just mention it from the start. Make it easy for other people. Just this CC BY. That's also something that I run into. Very informative. Copyright Flickr, same as copyright Creative Commons. Flickr is not a copyright holder. Flickr is a database of pictures. Not good. Yeah, I'm just mentioning this because this is about public domain. You don't have to attribute stuff in the public domain. I could have just put this picture here because it's public domain and just put it here, and I would not be required to acknowledge the author. However, it's always nice to do so. So if you're using public domain materials and you know where it comes from, it's always nice to maybe not in a long text like it is here, but you could at least say where you got the image from. And sites like Wikimedia, for example, offer some very nice options how you can cite them. This is an example of the CC0 legal tool I told about earlier. So this is a database on GitHub licensed under CC0. And the reason why they did this is, they explicitly state this, as in order to reduce any uncertainty about legitimate use of this dataset. So this is really the essence of the CC0 thing. It's public domain, and they wanted to make it very clear to everybody that everybody knows that this is public domain. So it's a very common thing that's used for datasets, and it's common on GitHub and on other data repositories. It means that you don't have to worry about attribution and other restrictions. Maybe you think if you reuse a dataset or if you're crawling a dataset, attribution is not the worst thing in the world, and I mean it isn't if you're talking about one dataset. If you're talking about a combination of 10 datasets and you want to go do a thorough crawl, and then you imagine the copyright statements you have to make for the new work. If you have to quote and to cite all those other datasets, it goes much quicker if you actually just put your data in the public domain. So this is one of my final slides. It's about like make it not only cite correctly, but also make it easier for others to correct you. So make sure if you put something online, make sure that you credit yourself as the author. Perhaps even give an example of how they should be cited. You know, this is something I did myself. I'm very stupid, but this is how. I mean, I know this is not the most elegant solution because it's very long. And I do understand that it's not always the most like aesthetic way to give attribution. But what you can also do is, for example, put it in a presentation and like put on the end a slide with all the credits. It's not like Creative Commons does not specify how you should do this. So as long as your intention is good and you make sure that everything you use is credited, you're pretty safe. And I'm going to leave you with this. Creative Commons cannot fix bad science. And it also cannot fix it if you have somebody with malevolent intentions. So it's not the fault, just as it's not the fault of open access or open science if bad science happens, it's not the fault of Creative Commons. It's a tool. So keep that in mind, that if, for example, if somebody abuses a work you license under Creative Commons, this is somebody perpetrating a crime. This is not Creative Commons not functioning. Just keep this in the back of your mind. And I also want to add this, that correct citation is essential to conduct scientific research. So not providing correct citation and is actually a copyright infringement. And it happens so much, and it happens in so many cases, but actually using somebody else's work without giving proper credit, using a photographer's work in your work and distributing that without giving the photographer credit is actually a copyright infringement. So I'm mentioning this as well because Creative Commons, for example, we're not like an alternative copyright system, or we're not like against copyright. We're working inside the system. We try to provide. We want to make it simpler and make it easier for people, and make it easier for people to share and to open up their stuff. But we still are based on copyright law. And in the other direction, if you find that somebody is violating your work that you license Creative Commons, you can go to court and win. So this is something also you have to keep in mind. If somebody does not attribute you but overuses your work and you license a Creative Commons license, you can go to court and you will win, because you have the long legal text which you can prove that somebody has violated those terms. I think this is it actually. So should we go for the questions now, or I don't know if there are any questions actually. At least one, okay. I have like a little video clip in the end for like the people of you watching at home, but maybe we can do first the questions because. Okay. This is we do have some nice accents in the videos. This is spoken by our CEO Ryan Merkley, and this is the latest one. And it highlights the ambition of Creative Commons to actually help to open up as much stuff as possible and to contribute to the global to the public domain, which is one of our big strategic goals for the next couple of years.
We need to talk about sharing, and I'm not talking about taxi and hotel apps. I'm talking about real sharing, the kind my mother taught me about. Turns out, sharing isn't just good for the playground, it's also good for grown-ups. Community, collaboration, and sharing are at the heart of human advancement. These values built the web we love. The idea that evolution is nothing more than a selfish struggle for survival is utterly, spectacularly incomplete. It appears we need each other after all. Harvard researcher Martin Novak calls it the snuggle for survival. We are hardwired for sharing. When we share, everyone wins, the giver, the receiver, and our communities. Studies have shown that with just a few sharers in the mix, they will inspire an entire culture of sharing. Now, if sharing is at the core of successful societies, then why do we have some of the most restrictive copyright laws in history? The commons is an idea as old as we are, but today, most of the world's creativity will be locked away for decades, even for those who want to share. You already know Creative Commons. You've seen our logo on Wikipedia, YouTube, Medium, Flickr, and more. We're even in the New York MoMA's permanent design collection. Every day, creators, institutions, nonprofits, and governments use our licenses to switch copyrights, all rights reserved, into CC's, some rights reserved. We are now the steward of a global commons, a universe of free and open content shared under simple terms that can spark new ideas and solve global challenges. Creators have shared over 1.1 billion works, including NASA's iconic images, educational materials in every subject, scientific research, government open data, 3D models, and more. But quantity isn't the key issue. We need the commons to be vibrant, usable, collaborative. Creators need to find the best new works, share feedback, give gratitude, get analytics, and build networks around their interests and passions. It's time to light up our global commons. Now this is where you come in. The effort to build a more connected commons is nothing short of transformational, and we need your help. It's a strategic shift for Creative Commons that will require us to develop new infrastructure, new tools, and new resources, and it will require a new level of investment. That's why we're launching our most ambitious campaign to date. And we're off to a great start, but we need you to tip the scales. Remember those first few who share? They will inspire a culture of sharing where everyone wins, the giver, the receiver, and our global community. Help us light up the global commons. Help create a world that is more accessible, equitable, and full of innovation. Visit creativecommons.org/remix and join the movement today.
Obviously, this was part of our fundraising campaign, but I still think it nicely summarizes what we stand for in 2016. So, are there any questions?
Any questions?
I know it was a lot of information, and
Yeah, we have a question over there. Wait. We need a mic for the recording.
Okay, I have a question about the order of indication. Is there a particular way you need to indicate the particular order? Let's say that this comes from some source and it has been adapted, or you can put it in any way. Just the important thing is that you actually indicate where everything comes from. I got this idea because, there are styles like APA, MLA, where you have to have this particular order of how you indicate things. Is there anything here like this?
I mean, as you can see, like here, I do it like in the really long way. I mean, I do realize that sometimes that's not suitable, or that's not good for your presentation or whatever. So you could, as long as you do it. And sometimes what you can also do is like just put the link behind the logo, and they just say like under it's by Gwen Franck, and then all the rest put it behind the logo. It's about usability, actually. If you make sure that other people can retrace your steps, you're fine.
So just to make sure we answer a question from Latvia. Gita from the University of Latvia is asking if CC should be adopted in country. In country.
On the national level, you mean?
Yeah. So
it's something you see now in science. It happens, like in open access policies, and CC licenses are often become obligatory for distribution of science. I think like even Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and they actually require science outputs to be in CC BY. I think I'd prefer actually having a fixed copyright law, like making copyright law where you don't have to be afraid of sharing and of reusing things. And if you're, I think I'd prefer that over actually a national obligation to use CC license. Remember, CC is it's very useful, and I think it will be around for a long time. But it's a tool. It's not a replacement. It's not an alternative copyright system, or it's not a magic, like the silver bullet. I should call it, that will fix everything. It's just a way to circumvent very complicated copyright laws. I think it's used a lot for government documentation, and especially for data. And I think like for using CC0 for government data is a very good thing, because it removes all doubt.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions? We still have time for one or two questions.
Are you checking the Twitter feed, or is it the email? Maybe
No, I haven't checked it yet. If you check it. Yeah, we have.
I would like to ask one more question. I wonder what will be with scientific journals if any scientific information will be for free. What is the future of?
Personally, I'm not really convinced that it's a task of society or scientists to actually keep scientific publishers in the business. I think that's their own responsibility. It's the basic. It's what Professor Martens also said. Like, it's still scientists and researchers who are still paid with public funds. And I mean, I think that's something that you always have to keep in mind. We've already paid for this research to be conducted in most cases. I don't think it's my duty as a taxpayer to actually also keep a business, the business of scientific publishing, alive. I mean, I'm perfectly fine if a publisher finds a way to make money out of the publishing system or make it into a reasonable business model. I think what you see happening now in open science is mainly a reaction to some very like things that are really wrong, like excessive article processing charges, excessive excessive subscription costs, very strict. You know, you always have these examples of like scientists actually signing away their copyrights, their author rights, and then not being allowed to distribute their own paper amongst their students. I mean, I know this sort of gets the status of an urban legend, but these things happen and have happened, and I don't feel like morally obliged to support this kind of practices. And if this can be fixed in one way or another, I think we should. And that then also CC can come in, as if you publish your paper and you either keep the author's rights and keep the author's rights and actually put a Creative Commons license on it, then that version of your paper will always be accessible, no matter what somebody else is going to do with it. No matter if they put it behind a paywall again, there will always be this original, will always be available because it's Creative Commons licensed. I don't know if does that answer your question, or did you have like a more specific thing in mind?
One more question. As I am a PhD student, I need to write 2 articles during 4 years of my study, and these articles need to have impact factor. So when if I desire to put my article on open access, what kind of impact factor I will have?
Okay, let me state very clearly here. Open access does not equal open access publishing. It does not mean if you want to put it in open access that you have to publish it in open access journal. I mean, I think everybody's very well aware that most open access journals, mainly because they're young, but also because there are some lower qualities because they're new journals, that they don't live up to par to the traditional high-tier journals that you might be expected to publish in a PhD. Maybe Professor Martens has some more to say about that later. I always say, publish wherever you want. Just check, and I think Shintari, the open access team can help with it. Check the conditions of your publisher. Almost all publishers allow you to self-archive a version of your work. Maybe after an embargo, maybe not. And that's equally fine. The end result is the same, your work is accessible, and you can still get your, I'm not sure it's going to be the nature of journalism, but you can still get your high profile picture, but at the same time allowing other people who don't have the funds to actually access your article. So keep that in mind. It does not equal open access publishing, open access. Open access publishing is one way of providing open access to your article. Maybe, yeah.
Sorry, I'll chip in. I was actually having a very similar conversation last night with Gwen about this problem. And this, my PhD students are under the same kind of pressure. They need to have 2 first author papers at impact factor 5 or above before they can graduate, which is crazy. But we also have this open access thing, and Gwen makes a very good point. For instance, in Nature, all the Nature Publishing Group journals, or nearly all of them, you have a 1-year embargo period, after which you can have, I think it may only be an unformatted version of your manuscript, i.e. the final version you submit before their copy editors make it look nicer. That you can then make available for free through an institutional website, your own website, or any way you see fit. So that is really useful, and 1-year embargo period, of course, is not perfect, but it's better than nothing, and at least for your PhD, you can then say, I have my requirement. Second thing is, a lot of publishers actually allow you these days to put your manuscript at the time of submission into an archive. Like the original one is ARXIV, archive, arxiv, but there's also bioarchive, which is the same thing with bio in front of it, and there must be others as well. But you need to look at the specific policy of each journal. So in my field, there's a few journals with roughly the same impact factor, and some of them allow it, and some of them do not allow it. And then you can easily give preference, if you like, to the ones that allow this. There's two good reasons to do that. One has to do with the fact that then it's open. The second one is a really scientific merit thing, which is, you know, if you publish in high impact factor journals, it can take a long time to get published. In Nature, the typical time it takes to convince people that your work is not completely worthless is about a year, from submission to publication. Meanwhile, somebody else in a lower impact factor journal, which has a turnaround time of 2 months, can publish their work there. And so then it becomes difficult to show that you were first. But if you can deposit it in archive, it's publicly available to everyone, and there's a timestamp given to it that you were the first to do this. Downside is, if they after 1 year decide to reject it in Nature, then, you know, people have time to make derivatives of your work and maybe hinder your own publication in another journal ultimately. But that is a very good strategy, and you can do that with, and so Nature allows this, and you can do this with every copy at every version. So you can have the original version, the revised version, the revised version, the revised version that they will undoubtedly want, all the way up to the last version. And so that is a very attractive alternative, but you need to read the copyright policy of the particular journal, and that only takes 2 minutes. And then you can make a list, or you can go and ask the librarians who tend to know these kind of things, but maybe not perfectly for all journals. But it's something really worth considering to make your data accessible. Final thing I'll say about this is it does boost the citations. It's not going to make it times 10, but you can easily get quite a few more, and that can make a big difference.
I've in the meantime, I just put the slides online, which basically explains what we've been saying. This is I mean, you've all probably heard about this, right? Green root, gold roots, open. But as you see at the start, you see that you just decide where to publish, and then you can either publish in an open access journal or in a subscription-based journal, and it can both lead to open access. Just keep that in mind. However, I do want to make like a little side note on that I'm following this public debate on open access very closely, and I do notice that the last year the tendency to identify open access publishing or open access with open access publishing is very prominently visible. I do think lots of green open access advocates and repositories are actually struggling to keep on being seen as a viable alternative for open access publishing. This is just some a little background information to keep in the back of your head, that I do sense that the public debate on this has shifted a bit over the last year. Any other questions?
That's it?
Okay, thank you.
No questions on tweet? No? Okay, yeah, so we hope we can get back to you if we have questions later on.
Sure.
That's our habit. So thank you very much. We stop at this point. Thank you very much, the audience in this conference room. And we also had around 50 people watching us online. Not to make this moment a sad one, as this is the last seminar in the Foster series.
This is the very last seminar in all of Foster, actually.
Wow!
Not only here in Lithuania.
Wow! Once again, Lennart, Gwen, thank you so much. We can't thank you enough for coming here today, for talking to us at this hour. Please, these are small tokens of our appreciation. Can't thank you enough, really. Thank you.
I was just saying that I really, really like the logo. But apparently there's not like a universal appreciation of the logo.
So thanks again, and greetings to Latvia.